Captain Whitehall with Company D, 2nd United States Sharpshooters. Today's video we're actually going to be starting the construction on the Schuylkill Arsenal Fatigue Blouse for Private White. As I said in the intro video, the instructions that is supplied through Wambaugh White & Company are very detailed, great colors. You can even see the stitching being done on the pieces of the coat. And today we're going to be starting with the sleeves. So to start with, we're going to be doing not the sleeve lining, but we will be doing the sleeve cuff facing. So to do that, you will want these two little pieces right here. And you're going to want to match them up, make sure that they're evenly cut, evenly fit, which I've never had a problem. I've sewn 6 of these coats so far and have never had a problem with that. So first, we're going to be prepping our cuff facings. And as the instructions state, it's going to be using a back stitch with a 1/4 inch seam right along here, as the picture shows. So we'll take our gauge, we'll push it down to 1/4 of an inch. Only need to really mark one piece. You just take this little blue line and you mate it up to here. Take your chalk roller and just like that, you have your chalk line. Easy as that. So we'll set that aside for the time being. I find it kind of a safe bet to always cover this. If they do get knocked over, there is some spillover through the chalk kind of being a powder, so it does come loose. Then you're going to take your beeswax that is supplied along with your lodgewood dyed thread. As I described in the intro, you just keep your thumb on top and basically put a pulling down motion through the wax. You can actually see the thread cutting through. And just like that. Then you're going to take one end of your thread. And this is a little difficult doing this kind of behind a camera right now, but please bear with me. Don't make too much fun. This is a little difficult. Okay, just like that, you just pull the tag end through. Not even sure if that's actual proper sewing vernacular, but I'm used to fishing line and stuff like that, and the loose end's always called the tag end, so we might as well just stick with what I know on that. If you have a little bit of a tail off your knot, that's not going to be a huge issue. Okay, so from there, you just grab your 2 pieces, make sure that they are even, and you're going to want to grab a couple pins just to hold everything in place for yourself. So we'll go right there. And we'll go right here, similar to what the picture is showing us on the instructions. There you go. You have prepped your cuff facing. And from there, with a back stitch, you're going to start a little bit inwards on your line. So right about there. Pull the thread all the way through, and then you're going to go back, hence back stitch. And I always try to do my very beginning portion of the back stitch, especially on the cuff facing, fairly close to the edge. That way I get some good starting point. It's strong. Fortunately, the lighting in here is not helpful. And then from there, you just go forward, push it through, pull it through, and then you stitch backwards. And pull through again. There isn't really a stitch count listed for this. Sometimes in their instructions it does list a tight back stitch or a tight running stitch. With this, I prefer, since it's kind of on a stress point, have my thread caught. Since it is on somewhat of a stress point, I do like to have tight stitching. I prefer tight stitching anyways. It just looks a lot more appealing to the eye, and it's kind of a way to show off your skill set with sewing. And as I said in the intro video, with these coats, they were passed out as kits just like this to women, older gentlemen in the area of the Arsenal, to help supplement and supply these garments a lot faster. Of course, I'm kind of taking my time on sewing this because talking I can't fully concentrate with talking and working like this at the same time. I'm not a talker with my hands very much when I'm focused. So there we go. And ideally, how you want this portion to look like is just like that. So I'm gonna kind of fast forward through this, and I will come back to you once this cuff facing is done. Alright, and now that we have both of our cuff facings done, as you can see, the stitching's nice and tight, so it's not going to come loose. You can always do a little pull test like that. Now the next part is you have to press these seams open, and what pressing the seam open means is you just take an iron and it lays these flat, so these are very nice and flat pieces. So for that, since I really don't have much of a ironing board, I'm just going to very carefully use this iron. And depending on your iron's quality, basically, just kind of depends what setting. This one is set to a wool setting, and it does a fairly decent job. When this gets more to the lining section, when you need to start pressing linings open and stuff like that, I usually have to up this one quite a bit. Okay. And with that, that is a pressed cuff facing. It will stick up just a little bit on you, but nothing too serious. Yep. And now that both cuff facings are pressed, we're going to take these both and set them aside. Now next, in the instructions, we're actually going to go back a step and work on the lining. So it says pin undersleeve linings to oversleeve linings along the inseam, the shorter of two sides. And basically, you're going to want to use a 3/8 inch seam with a tight running stitch, or 5 to 7 stitches per inch. And it also says there's no need to really press the linings open whatsoever. So, what this means, you are going to take your sleeve lining, All right, and now that it is all pinned up, chalked, marked, everything is all on the right side as it should be, we are going to start with our running stitch. And with that, we're just going to start by punching it through. Right about, and the problem that I've always had with this lining material is it's rather thin, so if you do this with too big of a needle, it's just going to pull your knot right through. So you always just want to apply light tugging pressure. Sorry, I just kind of went out of the screen. And with the running stitch, you're just going to mark in front, pull through. Make sure that this doesn't bind up too much on you because you're going to want to use it later on in the project. And since this is supposed to be a tight stitch, we'll go a little close, pull through, just like this. Of course, the fun part is always trying to guess where your line is on the back side. Sometimes it can be a little wavy, but no one's going to see this, so it really shouldn't be too big of an issue. And we'll just push our pin down. It likes to come out a little bit on us. And we will just go here, push and pull. Just a very long process of wash, rinse, spin, repeat. Which is always fun. And there we go. So I'm going to get to work on sewing up the sleeve lining, and then we'll move on to our next step. Alright, now that our sleeve lining is completely done, we are going to do another step with the sleeve lining and the cuff facing, which is we're going to pin or join and pin these together and then sew them with a 1/4 inch seam using a tight running stitch. So just like what we did sewing the sleeve lining together. And with that, you're just going to take your seams. So there is that end, and that's going to go right up flush against the seam line on the sleeve lining. So there's where we just sewn, but we're going to do it this way. Basically, you just want to go corner, pin it through. And I like to really make sure that my material stays in place, so I'm also going to pin crossways. This way it doesn't pull down and it doesn't pull to the side. And essentially we're just going to pin across just like that. And so on and so forth. I'm going to get both of these pinned up and be back with you in just a sec. Alright, and once done, your sleeve lining should look, sleeve cuff and sleeve lining should look exactly like this, with your chalk line marked at 1/4 of an inch, everything pinned down so it doesn't move on you, it doesn't shift. And just like the sleeve lining, we're just going to start off with the running stitch. So just punch that through, pull all the way out. Since this is new thread, it's going to take a little while, but once you get going and your sewing's pretty much all the way through on this, your thread's going to be a lot shorter, so you're not going to look like you're trying to pull sort of a chainsaw or a lawnmower or anything like that. It'll get shorter. It's always my least favorite part because I usually get caught on my pins or piece of clothing. I've got caught on the tripod I'm actually using for the camera quite a few times, and it's never a whole lot of fun having to stop, take a sec, and completely go back. So I'm going to continue sewing this up, and we'll show you the finished product in just a second. Alright, and once you're all done sewing your cuff lining, or cuff facing to your sleeve lining, it should look a little something like this. A very straight line, some fairly tight stitching, if my autofocus will pick that up. And basically the way this works, there's the cuff, the inside cuff of your coat that will rest right around here on your wrist. Kind of a bad way to do that, but come on now. There we go. So it'll be like that. Starting to look like a coat, right? Okay, maybe we're getting there, but eventually this will be part of a fantastic coat. So from there, after you were done doing your sleeve lining, there's going to be the next process, which is to sewing the actual outside of your coat sleeve. And with this, you're going to want a tight back stitch and a 3/8 inch seam, so the wool undersleeves to the oversleeves in the same manner as step 6. So basically just like this. However, you're going to want to actually press your seams open. That way everything fits snugly together, there's no issues, it's not going to pucker or bulge in any sense. So I'm going to get everything prepped up and start on that here in just a second to show you what it looks like. Alright, and once everything is all pinned up and marked, you're going to want everything to kind of look like this. I prefer using quite a few pins, especially with your little cross pin set up right here, mainly because you don't want puckering or kind of a bacon look. As you can kind of tell, this is a little wavy. If you don't really have it pinned all together, you can get gaps, so this portion can be offset like that. And obviously, once it's folded around and everything, it's going to look not great. Again, you know, however you want your impression to look. Do you want it to look like you're issued shoddy clothing or well-made clothing? Personally, if you make something well-made, it's going to last a lot longer than something very poorly made. So next, I'm going to sew this using the running stitch as we used with putting our cuff facings together, and be back in just 1 second. Alright, and here we have our complete sleeve sewn, at least half of it, because we're going to be needing it open here in just a minute. I haven't pressed the seams just yet, but I will be, because that will be a very important step for the next portion of the process of creating our sleeves. Again, make sure you pay very close attention to how you sew your sleeves together. You want to make sure that you have 2 arms and not 1 arm. So before you even start sewing and you have everything somewhat held together, just put a pin on either side at the ends, and just turn it inside out, maybe one in the middle, just so you can get a really good idea whether that sleeve is going to have a right side and a left side. If you end up with only 2 left sides or 2 right sides, just completely flip around what you did and you should be set. So our next process is going to be the next step in constructing our sleeves, which is right here. And this is basically we're going to be sewing our sleeves to our sleeve linings and sleeve facings. And in doing so, we're basically going to match them up together and sew them right here, as it says, beginning 1 inch up from the cuff. So essentially 1 inch up from here. And I'll go through the whole process of how to do that here in just a second. I'll be sure to kind of go in depth with everything. Sorry with all these short bits of video and then the pause and then everything's already done. Otherwise this video would be easily 2 hours long putting these sleeves together. So if you just want to be patient, wait a second, I will have everything set up for you. Alright, and here we have our sleeve linings, the cuff facings, and the body of the sleeve pinned together, essentially. Now this is where things can start to get a little tricky, especially if you're not familiar with the sewing terminology of a right and wrong side. So the side you're seeing right now is the wrong side. So this is not what's going to be up against the body. The right side is what will be up against your arm, right here. However, the right side of a coat sleeve is the portion that will be exposed to the elements, the outside, and obviously your seam is going to be here, as opposed to the wrong side, which has your press seam right here. So what you're going to do is you're going to take both right sides of lining and coat sleeve and form them together on the rounded ends right here. So you see the wrong side and wrong side right here. And essentially you're just going to pin it along where everything matches nicely. After that, this is where things get a little fun. So with the instructions on the kit, this actually gives you a little leeway because this is going to form the vent of the cuff. And you'll see what the vent of the cuff looks like eventually. The instructions say to start this up 1 inch from the very bottom of the sleeve lining. So from here to here is 1 inch. However, if you want deeper cuffs, just bring this up even higher. You can go pretty much all the way to where the coat body and the sleeve lining meet with the cuff facing. That's entirely up to you. That's your own personal flair, so to speak, if you want to add to it. And then essentially you just take a 1/4 inch seam and bring it all the way around over the press seams all the way down to the other side, which also has a 1 inch rise for your vent. And eventually, the reason for that vent, when the coat is together, gives you this little flared, almost kind of bell-shaped look once it's all sewn together and folded out properly, and it'll look very nice. I always love the way the vents on Fatigue Blouse cuffs look. For pins, I just pinned right down the center seam to make sure everything is squared. I also then proceeded to pin from the inside out, starting here, working my way down. And I also pinned the sleeve lining to the coat just so I don't have a bunch of material, flopping around flopping away on me. I might actually even pin it more down the side just so I have less things getting in the way. I like kind of keeping my work fairly hassle-free. That way I can focus exactly what I'm sewing and not fighting, this whole flop of material in my way. It just really helps the process of assembly, and especially if this is your first time really sewing one of these projects, it'll make it a lot more enjoyable for you. So I'm going to get this all sewn up, and show you what it looks like afterwards and move on to the next step after that.